Blood streaked the champion thoroughbred's leg as Ellie found him abandoned in the quarry, a crumpled note declaring him worthless after his injury. Her decision to save this discarded horse would ignite a war with the town's most powerful man, a battle where losing meant destruction for them both. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Willow Creek, a small rural town where life moved at the pace of the seasons. At the edge of town, in a modest cottage with a leaking roof and weathered walls, 17-year-old Ellie Morgan awoke before dawn. The pale light filtered through the thin curtains as she quietly dressed, careful not to wake her younger siblings who shared the cramped bedroom. Her movements were practiced and precise, born from years of responsibility thrust upon young shoulders after her father's death 3 years ago. Ellie's face, though young, carried a maturity in her eyes that spoke of hardship, weathered with quiet dignity. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical braid, and her hands, though slender, were marked with calluses from the endless work that kept their small family afloat. Despite the weight of responsibility, there was a stubborn light in her green eyes that refused to dim, a determination that carried her through each challenging day. As she stepped onto the porch, the cool morning air embraced her like an old friend. Their small farm, though struggling, was her sanctuary. 2 chickens pecked lazily at the ground, and their elderly mule, Samson, watched her from his modest shelter. It wasn't much, but it was home. Ellie allowed herself a moment to breathe before beginning her morning chores, selling eggs and the vegetables from their small garden to contribute to the family's meager income. "Morning, Samson," she called softly to the mule, who responded with a tired flick of his ears. Ellie smiled, reaching for the old bucket to collect eggs before heading into town to sell them. The routine was familiar, comforting in its predictability. But something about this morning felt different, a whisper of change in the air that Ellie couldn't quite explain. Her path to town led past the sprawling estate of Westland Stables, owned by the wealthy Harrison family. Ellie had never spoken to them, though she sometimes paused to watch their magnificent thoroughbreds running across the lush green pastures. Today, however, as she passed by the rarely used back trail that bordered the Harrison property, a sound caught her attention, a faint, distressed whinnying that seemed to echo from the abandoned quarry beyond the property line. Curiosity piqued. Ellie hesitated. She was already running late, and Mrs. Parker would be waiting for the eggs she'd promised. Yet something about that sound tugged at her heart. Making a quick decision, she set her basket down carefully behind a tree and ventured toward the source of the sound. The old quarry had been abandoned years ago, its steep walls and dangerous footing making it a place most locals avoided. As Ellie carefully picked her way down the rocky path, the whinnying grew louder, more desperate. Rounding a bend, she froze at the sight before her. There, trapped on a small ledge halfway down the quarry wall, stood a horse unlike any Ellie had ever seen up close. Even in his current state, thin, dirty, and clearly injured, the animal's breeding was evident in his proud lines and powerful build. His coat, beneath the layers of dirt and what appeared to be dried blood, was a deep, rich bay. One leg was held slightly off the ground, and his sides heaved with exertion and fear. "How did you get down there?" Ellie whispered, her heart racing as she assessed the situation. The horse's head jerked up at her voice, wild eyes meeting hers with a mixture of fear and desperation. It was clear he'd been there for at least a day, possibly longer. What wasn't clear was how such a magnificent animal had ended up abandoned in such a dangerous place. As Ellie carefully moved closer, she spotted something that made her blood run cold. A branded mark on the horse's flank, partially obscured by dirt, but unmistakable to anyone from Willow Creek. It was the Harrison mark, the same one that adorned all the thoroughbreds from Westland Stables. "You're one of theirs," she murmured, confusion washing over her. The Harrisons were known for their prized racehorses and the small fortune they spent maintaining them. Why would they abandon one of their valuable animals in such a cruel manner? The horse watched her warily as she inched closer, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Easy now. I won't hurt you. Let's see what's happened to you." Years of working with Samson had taught Ellie to move carefully around large animals, but this was different. This horse was scared, injured, and potentially dangerous. When she was close enough to see more clearly, Ellie's heart sank. The horse's leg wasn't just injured. There was a deep gash running along the foreleg, swollen and angry-looking. Without treatment, infection would set in, if it hadn't already. Additionally, the animal was severely malnourished, its ribs visible beneath the once magnificent coat. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, anger rising in her chest. Then she noticed something else, a crumpled piece of paper tucked under a nearby rock, deliberately placed. With trembling fingers, Ellie retrieved it and unfolded the damp paper. "Thunderbolt, injured during training, leg damage irreparable, not worth the vet bills. Dispose of quietly. J.H. James Harrison, the owner of Westland Stables." Ellie's fingers tightened around the note, crumpling it as a wave of disgust washed over her. The horse, Thunderbolt, had been deemed a business loss and discarded like trash, left to die slowly in pain and fear. Looking back at the magnificent animal, Ellie made a decision that would change her life forever. "They threw you away because you weren't profitable anymore," she said softly, inching closer to the frightened horse. "But I see you, Thunderbolt, and I won't leave you here." Getting the injured horse out of the quarry wouldn't be easy. Ellie knew she couldn't do it alone, but she also knew that involving others might mean the Harrisons would discover their abandoned horse was found. For reasons she couldn't yet articulate, Ellie felt fiercely protective of this discarded champion. "I'll be back," she promised, meeting the horse's intelligent eyes. "I need to get help, but I'll return before sundown. I promise you won't die here." As Ellie climbed back up the quarry path, her mind raced. Who could she trust? Their neighbor, Mr. Wilson, had worked with horses all his life before age forced him into retirement. He had no love for the Harrisons after they'd bought out several small farms, including parts of his own land. He might help without asking too many questions. The morning's plans forgotten, Ellie rushed home, barely acknowledging the curious looks from townsfolk who were accustomed to seeing her selling eggs at this hour. When she reached their small farm, she was relieved to find Mr. Wilson already there, sharing a cup of coffee with her mother as they often did on Tuesday mornings. "Ellie, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," her mother asked, rising from her chair with concern etched on her tired face. "I need help," Ellie said, looking directly at Mr. Wilson. "There's a horse trapped in the old quarry. He's injured badly. I can't get him out alone." Mr. Wilson's bushy eyebrows rose. "A horse in the quarry? Whose is it?" Ellie hesitated only briefly. "I don't know. He's been abandoned, left to die." The lie felt justified somehow. She would tell Mr. Wilson the truth eventually, but not until they had rescued Thunderbolt. The old man's weather-beaten face hardened. He'd never tolerated animal cruelty. "Let me get my rope and the old trailer. Martha," he said to Ellie's mother, "we might need some of those clean sheets for bandages." As they gathered supplies, Ellie felt a mixture of fear and determination. What she was doing could be considered theft by the Harrisons, regardless of their callous abandonment of the animal. A family like hers couldn't afford legal troubles. Yet the image of Thunderbolt's eyes, filled with pain and a desperate will to live, strengthened her resolve. By noon, they had returned to the quarry. Thunderbolt was exactly where Ellie had left him, though he seemed weaker, his proud head hanging lower. Mr. Wilson let out a low whistle when he saw the horse. "That's a thoroughbred if I ever saw one," he murmured, eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. And that's no ordinary injury. Something went very wrong with this one. Ellie watched his face carefully. Can we save him? Mr. Wilson's eyes met hers, something like respect kindling in their depths. It won't be easy, or cheap, but if anyone's stubborn enough to try, it's you, Ellie Morgan. And in that moment, as the abandoned champion raised his head to look at his unlikely rescuers, Ellie made a silent vow. This discarded horse would not only live, one day he would run again. Not for the glory of owners who had abandoned him, but for himself. And perhaps in saving him, she might find a way to save a piece of herself too. The piece that still dared to dream in a world that had given her every reason not to. Rescuing Thunderbolt from the quarry proved even more challenging than Ellie had anticipated. The steep, unstable walls made reaching him treacherous, and the horse's fear complicated their efforts. Mr. Wilson, despite his age, moved with the confidence of someone who had handled horses his entire life. His weathered hands worked quickly, fashioning a makeshift harness from the ropes they'd brought. "He's going to fight us," Mr. Wilson warned as they prepared. "He's scared and in pain. That makes any animal dangerous, especially one this size." Ellie nodded, her face set with determination. "I'll talk to him. Maybe it will help." While Mr. Wilson secured the trailer and prepared the extraction path, Ellie carefully made her way back down to Thunderbolt. The horse watched her approach, ears flicking nervously, but he didn't try to flee. That alone told Ellie how exhausted he must be. "Hey there," she said softly, keeping her voice even and calm. "I know you're scared, but we're going to get you out of here." She extended her hand slowly, palm up, letting him catch her scent. Thunderbolt's nostrils flared as he sniffed cautiously. After a tense moment, he lowered his head slightly. Not quite trust, but at least acceptance. The extraction took nearly 3 hours. They had to secure Thunderbolt with ropes and guide him up a makeshift path they reinforced with boards brought from Mr. Wilson's truck. Twice the horse nearly fell, his injured leg buckling under him. Each time, Ellie's heart stopped, only to resume its frantic beating when they managed to steady him. By the time they loaded the trembling horse into the trailer, all three were exhausted. Thunderbolt's coat was slick with sweat, his breathing labored. The injured leg looked worse up close, the wound angry and hot to the touch. "He needs antibiotics," Mr. Wilson said grimly as they drove slowly back toward Ellie's farm. "And proper wound care. This isn't going to heal on its own." "The vet costs money we don't have," Ellie said, voicing the reality they both understood. Mr. Wilson was quiet for a moment. "I still have some supplies from when I had my own horses. Not enough, but it's a start. And Doc Mercer owes me a favor. I might be able to get him to look at your boy without charging full price." "He's not really my boy," Ellie said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't entirely true. Something had shifted inside her the moment she'd found that crumpled note. Thunderbolt had been discarded, deemed worthless by people who measured value only in dollars and winnings. She refused to see him that way. "He's somebody's now," Mr. Wilson replied simply. When they arrived at the Morgan farm, Ellie's mother was waiting, her face tight with worry. She'd prepared the old shed, laying down fresh straw and clearing space for the injured horse. Sarah Morgan was a practical woman who had learned to stretch every penny after her husband's death, and Ellie could see the calculations happening behind her tired eyes. "Ellie, this animal needs care we can't afford to give," she said quietly as they slowly guided Thunderbolt from the trailer. "I know, Mom, but I couldn't leave him there to die." Ellie met her mother's gaze steadily. "I'll figure it out. I'll work extra shifts at the diner. I'll find a way." Sarah Morgan sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her daughter's jaw, the same expression her late husband had worn when his mind was made up. "We'll talk about this later," she said, but her voice had softened. She too had seen the terrible condition of the horse, and despite her practical nature, Sarah Morgan had never been able to turn away from suffering. Settling Thunderbolt in the shed was a delicate process. The space, though clean, was far cry from the luxury stables he must have been accustomed to at Westland. Yet the horse seemed to sense the kindness in his new caretakers. Once inside, he nearly collapsed onto the fresh straw, his body finally giving in to exhaustion. Mr. Wilson returned an hour later with a battered medical kit and various supplies. Doc Mercer says he'll stop by tomorrow morning. Until then, we need to clean that wound and get some food and water into him. Cleaning Thunderbolt's injury revealed its severity. The gash ran almost the length of his cannon bone, deep enough that Ellie winced at the sight of it. How long had he been standing on that injured leg, trapped and alone? The thought made her eyes sting with angry tears. "Those Harrisons," Mr. Wilson muttered as he gently applied antiseptic to the wound. Treating a magnificent animal like this as if he were a broken machine. Disgraceful. Ellie looked up sharply. "You knew?" The old man gave her a knowing look. "I've worked with horses for 50 years, girl. I know a Westland thoroughbred when I see one, and that mark on his flank isn't exactly subtle." Ellie bit her lip. "I found a note. They abandoned him because his injury meant he couldn't race anymore. They said he wasn't worth the vet bills." Mr. Wilson's weathered face hardened. "I'm not surprised. James Harrison sees these animals as investments, nothing more. If they don't turn a profit, they're discarded." He patted Thunderbolt's neck gently. "But this fellow, he's got heart. You can see it in his eyes." That night, Ellie slept in the shed beside Thunderbolt, waking every few hours to check on him. By morning, the horse seemed marginally better. He accepted water and a small amount of feed, though he remained wary when anyone approached his injured leg. Dr. Mercer arrived just after sunrise, his ancient truck rumbling up the dirt driveway. He was a tall, thin man with spectacles perched on his nose and a perpetually serious expression. His veterinary practice mainly focused on farm animals these days, but he had started his career working with racehorses. His examination of Thunderbolt was thorough and silent. Only when he had finished did he turn to Ellie, his expression grave. "This horse has suffered a severe tendon injury along with the laceration. It's the kind of injury that ends racing careers." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "The Harrisons?" Ellie nodded, not bothering to deny it. Dr. Mercer's mouth tightened. "Thought as much. I treated their horses for years until James took over from his father. The old man had his faults, but he respected his animals. The son," he shook his head, "well, he's cut from different cloth." "Can Thunderbolt be healed?" Ellie asked, her voice small but determined. The vet sighed. "The wound can heal with proper care. The tendon damage is another matter. He'll need time, months, not weeks. And even then, he'll likely always have a slight lameness." He fixed Ellie with a serious look. "He's never going to race again, if that's what you're hoping." "I don't care about racing," Ellie said firmly. "I just want him to be okay, to have a good life." Something in Dr. Mercer's stern face softened. He reached into his bag and pulled out several bottles and packets. "Antibiotics, pain management, wound care supplies. Change the dressing twice daily. Keep it clean and dry." "How much do we owe you?" Sarah Morgan asked, her voice tight with concern. Dr. Mercer glanced at Mr. Wilson, then back at the worried faces of the Morgan family. "Wilson here fixed my fencing last spring. Let's call this even." Before they could thank him, he added gruffly, "I'll be back in a week to check his progress. If there's any sign of increased swelling or fever, call me immediately." As the vet drove away, Ellie felt a surge of hope. It wouldn't be easy, but they had a chance now. She turned to Thunderbolt, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes that had captured her heart in the quarry. "You hear that? You're going to get better," she whispered, gently stroking his neck. "And no one's ever going to throw you away again." Later that afternoon, as Ellie was changing Thunderbolt's water, a sleek black car pulled up to their humble farmhouse. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped out, his face set in hard lines of displeasure. James Harrison had discovered his discarded investment was missing, and he had come to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. Ellie felt her blood run cold at the sight of James Harrison standing in their dusty yard, his polished shoes and tailored suit painfully out of place amid the humble surroundings. Behind her, in the relative safety of the shed, Thunderbolt shifted restlessly, as if he could sense the presence of his former owner. Harrison's cold eyes swept over the property with undisguised disdain before settling on Ellie. "I understand you found something that belongs to me," he said, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of someone accustomed to getting his way. Ellie stood straighter, suddenly aware of her worn clothes and the dirt under her fingernails. "I found an abandoned horse left to die in the quarry," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He was injured and starving." Harrison's expression didn't change. "Unfortunate but necessary. The animal suffered an accident during training. The prognosis was poor, and the cost of treatment unjustifiable." He spoke as if discussing a broken appliance rather than a living creature. "Nevertheless, he remains my property. I've come to reclaim him." "Reclaim him?" Ellie couldn't hide her disbelief. "You threw him away. You left him to die a slow, painful death rather than pay for his treatment or even grant him a humane end." A flash of irritation crossed Harrison's face. "Young lady, you have no idea about the economics of thoroughbred racing. That horse represented a significant investment, one that became untenable after his injury. My decision was purely business." "I found your note," Ellie said, pulling the crumpled paper from her pocket. "Not worth the vet bills. That's what you wrote." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Going through my private correspondence is illegal, as is taking my property. Abandoning an animal to die is also illegal," came a new voice. Mr. Wilson had emerged from the barn, his weathered face set in hard lines. "As is animal cruelty. I wonder what the Racing Commission would think of your methods, Harrison." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Harrison's face. "Wilson, still bitter about selling your land, I see." "Still recognizing a snake when I see one," Mr. Wilson replied evenly. "That horse was abandoned on public land, left to die. In my book, and likely in the eyes of the law, that means you forfeited ownership." Harrison's expression darkened. "I don't have time for this nonsense. The horse is valuable breeding stock regardless of his racing capability. My men will collect him now." He gestured toward his car, where two workers had emerged ready to follow orders. Ellie stepped in front of the shed door. "No, you don't get to throw him away and then decide he's valuable again when it suits you." Sarah Morgan appeared from the house, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her face paled at the scene unfolding in her yard, but she moved to stand beside her daughter. "Mr. Harrison, I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't threaten my daughter or trespass on our property." Harrison's laugh was cold. "Mrs. Morgan, let's be realistic. You're a widow struggling to keep this pitiful farm afloat. I could buy this entire property 10 times over without noticing the expense." His tone shifted, becoming almost reasonable. "I'm prepared to compensate you for your inconvenience. $500 seems more than fair for a few days of caring for the animal." Ellie watched her mother's face, seeing the momentary flicker of consideration. $500 was more money than they'd see in months. It could fix the leaky roof, buy winter clothes for her siblings, pay off some of the mounting debts that kept her mother awake at night. But then Sarah Morgan's expression hardened. "Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Harrison. My daughter found that horse abandoned and injured. She spent every waking hour trying to save him, As far as I'm concerned, he's now part of this pitiful farm you seem to look down on." Harrison's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. That horse is worth tens of thousands of dollars." "If he's worth so much," Ellie interrupted, "why did you leave him to die instead of treating his injury?" A tense silence followed her question. Harrison's eyes moved from Ellie to her mother, then to Mr. Wilson, assessing the unexpected resistance. Finally, his gaze settled back on Ellie, a calculating look replacing his anger. $1,000, he said smoothly. "Final offer. That's more than generous considering your circumstances." He glanced pointedly at the patched roof of their small home. Ellie felt her resolve waver for just a moment. That kind of money could make such a difference for her family. But then she remembered Thunderbolt's eyes when she found him, the fear, the pain, and beneath it all that fierce will to live that had called to something deep inside her. "Thunderbolt isn't for sale," she said firmly. Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Thunderbolt? How quaint. His registered name is Royal Tempest, and he's worth far more than your sentimentality." His voice hardened. "This isn't over. That horse is my property, and I will reclaim him. You people have no idea who you're dealing with." "I think we do," Mr. Wilson said quietly. "A man who values money over decency, who treats living creatures as disposable assets, who thinks wealth gives him the right to bully honest folk." Harrison's face tightened with fury, but he maintained his composure. "Enjoy your moral superiority while you can. It won't keep the bank from foreclosing on this dump or feed your family through winter." He turned to his men. "We're leaving. For now." As the black car pulled away in a cloud of dust, Ellie felt her knees go weak with the aftermath of adrenaline. Her mother's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "Did we just make a powerful enemy?" Ellie asked, her voice small. Sarah Morgan sighed. "I suspect James Harrison was never going to be our friend, honey." Mr. Wilson watched the disappearing car with a grim expression. "Harrison won't give up easily. Men like him aren't used to being refused." "What will he do?" Ellie asked. "He has connections," Mr. Wilson replied. "With local authorities, with business owners. He could make things difficult for your family." Sarah squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "We've faced difficult before. We'll face it again." Ellie nodded, drawing strength from her mother's quiet resilience. Together, they walked back to the shed where Thunderbolt waited. The horse had settled somewhat, though his ears still flicked nervously. When he saw Ellie, he nickered softly, a sound that squeezed her heart. "I think he knows," she whispered, approaching slowly to stroke his neck. "He knows we stood up for him." That evening, as Ellie tended to Thunderbolt's wound, carefully cleaning and rebandaging as Dr. Mercer had shown her, she spoke softly to the horse about her plans and hopes. Though she knew the challenges ahead were enormous, Harrison's threats, the horse's recovery, their own financial struggles, something had shifted inside her. The helplessness that had shadowed her since her father's death had been replaced by a fierce determination. "We'll figure this out together," she promised Thunderbolt as she checked his water one last time before bed. "You focus on healing. I'll handle the rest." Later, lying in bed, Ellie couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying Harrison's cold voice. This isn't over. She knew he was right. A man like James Harrison, used to power and privilege, wouldn't simply walk away from something he considered his property. He would come back, perhaps with legal documents, perhaps with the sheriff. And what defense did they have? A crumpled note that proved abandonment but might not hold up in court. Just before dawn, Ellie sat bolt upright in bed, struck by a sudden realization. If Thunderbolt had been as valuable as Harrison claimed, worth tens of thousands, even after his injury, then there must be documentation of his lineage and registration, papers that would prove his identity as Royal Tempest, the thoroughbred from Westland Stables. Papers that Ellie did not have. Without those documents, how could Harrison definitively prove the injured bay horse in their shed was his prized thoroughbred? Especially if Thunderbolt no longer looked quite the same as the horse Harrison had abandoned. An idea began to form in Ellie's mind. Risky, perhaps even desperate, but potentially their only shield against Harrison's wealth and influence. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Ellie Morgan made a decision that would either save Thunderbolt or lead them all into even deeper trouble. Dawn had barely broken when Ellie slipped out to the old shed, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Inside, Thunderbolt stood alert, his ears pricking forward at her approach. Despite his injuries and the trauma he'd endured, there was still something regal about him, a quality that couldn't be hidden by dirt or neglect. "Morning, boy," she whispered, setting down her bag. "We've got some work to do today." From the bag, she withdrew several items: a pair of scissors, some dark walnut stain she'd found in her father's old carpentry supplies, and hydrogen peroxide. Her plan was risky and perhaps a bit desperate, but it might buy them time. If Harrison couldn't immediately identify Thunderbolt as Royal Tempest, it would be harder for him to make legal claims. "This isn't permanent," she assured the horse as she dampened a cloth with the peroxide, just enough to throw them off for a while. Gently, she began working on the white blaze that ran down Thunderbolt's face, his most distinctive marking. The peroxide would lighten it slightly, making it less prominent. Next came the walnut stain, carefully applied to create the appearance of additional markings on his legs. Lastly, and most difficult for Ellie, was trimming his beautiful mane, which had once been meticulously groomed for the show ring. Now it would be shorter, slightly ragged, further disguising his pedigree appearance. Throughout the process, Thunderbolt remained surprisingly cooperative, as if sensing Ellie's intentions were protective rather than harmful. When she finished, the transformation was subtle but effective. To a casual observer, he still appeared to be a handsome thoroughbred, but his distinctive identifying features had been altered just enough to create doubt. "There," she said, stepping back to assess her work. "Now let's see Harrison prove you're his horse." Ellie had just finished cleaning up when Mr. Wilson arrived earlier than usual. His weathered face registered surprise at Thunderbolt's altered appearance. "Smart thinking," he acknowledged after she explained her plan. "Won't fool anyone who examines him closely, but it might create enough doubt to give us time." "Time for what?" Ellie asked. Mr. Wilson's eyes crinkled with a hint of mischief. "Time for me to make some inquiries. I still have friends in the racing world. If Royal Tempest was as valuable as Harrison claims, there will be records, racing history, lineage, ownership papers, information that might help us." "You think we can fight him legally?" Ellie asked, hope flickering in her chest. "Maybe." Mr. Wilson didn't sound entirely convinced. "Harrison has money and influence, but he also has a reputation to protect. If we can prove he deliberately abandoned an injured animal..." The rest of the morning was spent on Thunderbolt's care. Dr. Mercer had left detailed instructions for cleaning and treating the wound, and Ellie followed them meticulously. Though still severe, the injury was showing early signs of improvement. The angry redness had diminished slightly, and Thunderbolt seemed more willing to put weight on the leg, if only for short periods. "You're a fighter," Ellie told him, rewarding his patience with a gentle stroke along his neck. "Just like my dad always said, it's not how many times you fall that matters, it's how many times you get back up." By midday, Ellie had to leave for her shift at Maggie's Diner, the local restaurant where she worked weekends and after school. She changed quickly, her mind still half on Thunderbolt as she bicycled into town. The diner was busier than usual for a Saturday, filled with locals enjoying Maggie's famous apple pie and gossiping about town affairs. Ellie had barely tied on her apron when she overheard a conversation that made her freeze. "Offering a reward now," said Tom Jenkins, the local feed store owner. $2,000 for information about the missing thoroughbred. Seems Harrison's mighty desperate to get that horse back. "2,000?" whistled his companion. "That's more than most folks around here see in months. Someone's bound to start looking." "Already happening," Tom replied. "Saw a couple of Harrison's men asking questions over at Wilson's old place this morning. Guess they figure he might know something." Ellie's hands trembled as she picked up her order pad. Harrison was escalating faster than she'd anticipated. A reward that size would turn every struggling farmer and curious teenager into a potential informant. And worse, they were already focusing on Mr. Wilson. Throughout her shift, Ellie's anxiety grew as she caught fragments of similar conversations. Harrison's reward was the talk of the town, and several patrons openly wondered about the sudden interest in a supposedly injured horse. If the animal wasn't valuable, why offer so much money? When Maggie, the diner's owner, noticed Ellie's distraction, she pulled her aside with concern. "You all right, honey? You look like you're carrying the weight of the world today." Ellie hesitated. Maggie had been a friend of her father's and had given Ellie the job without question when the family needed the income. But could she trust her with this? "I'm fine," Ellie said, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Been up early helping Mom with the garden." Maggie's kind eyes studied her face, clearly unconvinced. "If you need anything at all, you know you can come to me, right?" Ellie nodded, throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I know. Thanks, Maggie." By the time her shift ended, Ellie was desperate to get back home to check on Thunderbolt. As she untied her bicycle from the rack behind the diner, a sleek car pulled into the parking lot. Ellie's heart sank when she recognized Harrison's personal assistant, Andrew Phillips, a thin man with calculating eyes who handled his employer's more delicate matters. Phillips spotted her immediately, his thin smile never reaching his eyes. "Ellie Morgan, isn't it? Just the person I was hoping to find." Ellie gripped her bicycle handlebars tightly. "I have to get home." "This will only take a moment," Phillips said smoothly. He withdrew an envelope from his jacket. "Mr. Harrison has asked me to deliver a more formal offer for the horse currently in your possession." "I told Mr. Harrison yesterday that Thunderbolt isn't for sale." Phillips raised an eyebrow at the name. "Mr. Harrison is prepared to be quite generous. $5,000, Miss Morgan. Think of what that could do for your family." His gaze flicked meaningfully to her worn shoes and faded uniform. "The repairs your home needs, the education you clearly desire, all for an injured horse that may never fully recover." The amount was staggering to Ellie. $5,000 would change everything for her family. It could secure her siblings' future, ease her mother's constant worry, perhaps even allow Ellie herself to consider college, a dream she'd silently abandoned after her father's death. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was she being selfish, putting a horse's welfare above her family's security? But then she remembered Thunderbolt's eyes when she'd found him. The pain, yes, but also that spark of life, that will to survive that had called to something deep within her. "Tell Mr. Harrison my answer hasn't changed," she said firmly. "Thunderbolt isn't property to be bought and sold." Philip studied her with cold curiosity, as if she were some unusual specimen. "Interesting. Mr. Harrison thought your principles might have a price. He'll be disappointed." "I'm sure he'll survive the disappointment," Ellie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As she pedaled away, Ellie could feel Phillips watching her. Harrison was escalating his efforts, first the reward, now this substantial offer. What would come next when money failed to achieve his goal? The question haunted her all the way home, where new troubles awaited. Ellie knew something was wrong the moment she turned onto the dirt road leading to their farm. Two unfamiliar trucks were parked in the yard, and a small group of men stood talking with her mother, whose face was tight with tension. As Ellie pedaled closer, she recognized Sheriff Davis among them, his expression serious beneath his worn hat. Her heart racing, Ellie dropped her bicycle and hurried toward them. "What's happening? Is everything okay?" Sheriff Davis turned to her, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Afternoon, Ellie. Just having a word with your mother about a stolen horse." "Stolen?" Ellie repeated, anger flaring despite her fear. "Thunderbolt wasn't stolen. He was abandoned in the quarry, left to die." One of the men, clearly one of Harrison's employees from Westland Stables, stepped forward. "The horse in question is Royal Tempest, a valuable thoroughbred owned by Mr. Harrison. He was being transported for medical evaluation when there was an incident. The trailer was damaged and the horse escaped." The lie was so blatant that Ellie almost laughed. "That's not what happened. I found him in the quarry with a note. Mr. Harrison wrote that the horse wasn't worth the vet bills and should be disposed of quietly." Sheriff Davis frowned. "Do you have this note, Ellie?" A chill ran through her. The note, the critical evidence of Harrison's abandonment, was no longer in her pocket where she'd kept it. In the chaos of rescuing and caring for Thunderbolt, she'd set it aside somewhere. I had it yesterday. I must have put it somewhere safe." The stable manager smirked. "Convenient." "Don't you dare call my daughter a liar," Sarah Morgan said, her voice quiet but steel-edged. "James Harrison was here yesterday demanding the horse back. If it was simply lost, why didn't he mention that instead of offering to buy it from us?" Sheriff Davis raised an eyebrow. "Harrison offered to purchase the horse from you?" $5,000, Ellie confirmed. "Just an hour ago through his assistant. Why would he do that if Thunderbolt, Royal Tempest, was clearly his property?" This gave the sheriff pause. He removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, I've got a report of stolen property. I need to investigate. But I'm not here to take any horse today, not without proper documentation." He turned to Harrison's men. "Tell Mr. Harrison if he wants to press charges, he'll need to provide proof of ownership and evidence the horse was stolen rather than abandoned." Relief washed over Ellie. Sheriff Davis had a reputation for fairness despite the influence wealthy families like the Harrisons wielded in Willow Creek. He wasn't simply going to take their word for it. After the men departed, with Harrison's employees looking distinctly displeased, Ellie rushed to the shed. Thunderbolt was there, seemingly undisturbed, though clearly agitated by the commotion. His altered appearance might have created just enough doubt to prevent immediate identification. "We need to find that note," Sarah said, following her daughter. "And we need to decide how far we're willing to take this, Ellie. Harrison isn't going to stop." "I know," Ellie replied, stroking Thunderbolt's neck to calm him. "But neither am I." That evening they searched the house thoroughly, but the note remained missing. As they sat at the kitchen table, the weight of their situation pressed down on them. Harrison had escalated from offers to legal threats, and without the note, their claim that he had abandoned Thunderbolt was just their word against his. "Maybe we should consider his offer," Sarah said quietly, after Ellie's younger siblings had gone to bed. $5,000 would make a huge difference for us, and he'd probably still increase it. "And what happens to Thunderbolt?" Ellie asked, though she already knew the answer. Her mother sighed. "Harrison wouldn't spend that kind of money just to be cruel, Ellie. If the horse has value to him—" "As breeding stock," Ellie interrupted. "That's what he said yesterday. But he was willing to let Thunderbolt die when he thought he couldn't race anymore. He only wants him back now because he realized he could still profit from him." Sarah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. "I know you care about him, sweetheart, but we need to be practical. We're talking about going up against the wealthiest man in the county. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't practical," Ellie said softly, echoing words her father had often spoken. Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You sound just like him." The next morning, Mr. Wilson arrived early, his truck kicking up dust as it rolled into the yard. His face was grim as he greeted Ellie. "Harrison's men came by my place yesterday," he said without preamble, asked a lot of questions about whether I'd helped recover a missing thoroughbred. "The sheriff was here too," Ellie told him, quickly explaining the confrontation. Mr. Wilson nodded. "Harrison won't give up easily, but I've got some news that might help." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, called an old friend who works at the Racing Commission, had him look up Royal Tempest's record. Ellie unfolded the paper, which contained printed information about Thunderbolt's racing history, ownership, and distinguishing marks. Most interesting was a small note at the bottom. "Purchased by Westland Stables for $120,000, insured for $200,000. "Insurance?" Ellie looked up, confused. Mr. Wilson's eyes twinkled. "Most valuable racehorses are insured. If they die or are permanently injured, the owner collects the insurance payout, but," his finger tapped the paper, "only if they can prove the horse received proper veterinary care and that all reasonable efforts were made to treat the injury." Understanding dawned on Ellie. So if Harrison abandoned Thunderbolt instead of getting him treatment, he'd be committing insurance fraud if he tried to collect, Mr. Wilson finished. "My guess is he reported the horse as missing or stolen to avoid suspicion. He couldn't admit he'd ordered Thunderbolt abandoned. It would void the insurance policy." Hope sparked in Ellie's chest. "So that's why he's so desperate to get him back. It's not just about the breeding value. It's about covering his tracks," Mr. Wilson confirmed. "If anyone discovered he'd deliberately abandoned a valuable insured horse rather than providing veterinary care." Ellie's mind raced with the implications. "We need to find that note. It's proof of what he did." Mr. Wilson nodded. "And we need to document Thunderbolt's condition. The wound, his malnourishment, everything that shows he was neglected, not just injured." For the first time since Harrison's visit, Ellie felt they might have a chance. If they could prove his actions, his reputation would be at stake, something a man like James Harrison valued almost as much as money. While Mr. Wilson checked on Thunderbolt's leg, Ellie told him about the altered appearance and Harrison's assistant approaching her at the diner. $5,000 is a lot of money to turn down, Mr. Wilson said, carefully examining the healing wound. "Most folks around here would have taken it without question." "I'm not most folks," Ellie replied, lifting her chin stubbornly. Mr. Wilson smiled, a rare sight that transformed his weathered face. "No, you certainly aren't. You're Joe Morgan's daughter through and through." The comparison to her father filled Ellie with a quiet pride. Joe Morgan had been known throughout Willow Creek for his integrity, even when it cost him. He'd stood up to Harrison's father years ago when the elder Harrison tried to buy out the local farmers to expand his holdings. Her father hadn't been able to stop the expansion entirely, but his resistance had inspired others to hold their ground. Now, Ellie was following in his footsteps, standing up for what was right, even when the easier path lay elsewhere. The realization strengthened her resolve. She might not have her father's presence anymore, but she had inherited his spirit. "Harrison's going to keep coming," Mr. Wilson warned as he carefully rebandaged Thunderbolt's leg. "And next time, it might not be just the sheriff and some stable hands." Ellie met his gaze steadily. "Then we'd better be ready." The next week passed in a strange limbo of anxious waiting and hopeful progress. Each day, Thunderbolt showed small but encouraging signs of improvement. His wound was healing, albeit slowly, and he'd begun to put more weight on his injured leg. The fear that had clouded his eyes when Ellie first found him had been replaced by a calm trust that made her heart swell whenever she approached. Dr. Mercer visited twice, examining Thunderbolt with careful hands and thoughtful silence. After his second visit, he stood back, nodding with grudging approval. "You've done well," he told Ellie. The infection risk has passed and the wound is healing cleanly. The tendon damage. He hesitated. It's hard to say. He may always have a slight limp, but he's doing better than I expected. Will he ever be able to run again? Ellie asked, stroking Thunderbolt's neck. Dr. Mercer removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief. Run? Yes, eventually. Race competitively? No. That part of his life is over. He studied Ellie's face. But there are many ways a horse can live a good life beyond the track. Ellie nodded, already imagining Thunderbolt healthy and strong, perhaps even carrying her across the open fields behind their farm. The very possibility felt like a miracle given his condition when she'd found him. Harrison came to see me, Dr. Mercer said suddenly, his voice dropping lower. Asked if I'd treated any injured thoroughbreds recently. Ellie's hand stilled on Thunderbolt's neck. What did you tell him? That my patient confidentiality extends to all species. A smile briefly lifted the corner of Dr. Mercer's mouth. He didn't appreciate that answer. After the vet left, Ellie spent extra time with Thunderbolt, introducing him to gentle exercise, just a few steps at first, then gradually longer walks around the small paddock adjacent to the shed. Her siblings had become enchanted with the horse, bringing him carrots and apples saved from their own meals, reading to him from their school books, and keeping him company when Ellie was at work. Even her mother had softened, though Sarah Morgan remained pragmatic about their situation. Harrison's gone quiet, she remarked one evening as she helped Ellie change Thunderbolt's bandages. That worries me more than his threats. Ellie had been thinking the same thing. The reward posters had disappeared from town, and Harrison's men were no longer openly asking questions. Sheriff Davis hadn't returned, and even Phillips seemed to have abandoned his pursuit of a deal. The silence felt ominous, like the stillness before a storm. Their search for the missing note had yielded nothing. Ellie had looked everywhere, through her clothes, around the shed, in every corner of their small house. She'd even retraced her steps to the quarry, wondering if she might have dropped it there. The note had simply vanished. Maybe he's given up, Ellie suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. Sarah Morgan gave her daughter a knowing look. Men like Harrison don't give up. They just change tactics. The truth of her mother's words became apparent the very next day. Ellie was at the diner, halfway through her Saturday shift, when Maggie called her into the small office at the back. Ellie, honey, I'm sorry about this, Maggie began, her normally cheerful face drawn with worry. But I've got to cut your hours. The news hit Ellie like a physical blow. The diner job was their most reliable source of income. Did I do something wrong? Lord, no, Maggie exclaimed. You're the best worker I've got, it's just... She hesitated, then squared her shoulders. James Harrison's bank called in part of my loan unexpectedly. I need to reduce expenses immediately to make the payments. Ellie felt the blood drain from her face. Harrison's bank? You mean First Willow Creek Bank? Maggie nodded miserably. They've held my mortgage for years. Never had a problem before. Always made my payments on time. Then yesterday, I get this letter saying they're restructuring my loan and I need to make an additional payment by the end of the month. Fury washed through Ellie. Harrison owned controlling interest in First Willow Creek Bank. Everyone knew that. This wasn't coincidence. It was retaliation. Maggie, I'm so sorry. This is because of me. Because of Thunderbolt. Briefly, Ellie explained the situation. Maggie listened, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage. That snake, using my business to pressure you? She shook her head firmly. No, honey. I'm not cutting your hours. We'll figure something out. You can't risk your business for me, Ellie protested. Watch me, Maggie replied with a flash of the determination that had allowed her to build the diner from nothing after her husband's death. My Homer and your daddy were friends for 30 years. He'd never forgive me if I let Harrison bully you this way." Ellie left the diner with a mixture of gratitude and dread. Harrison was now expanding his tactics beyond her family, targeting those who supported them. How many others in town might suffer because of her stand against him? The thought made her stomach twist. When she arrived home, another shock awaited. A letter from the county assessor's office sat open on the kitchen table. Their property taxes had been reassessed and had somehow doubled. "This is Harrison again," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger and worry. "The timing's too perfect to be coincidence." Ellie sank into a chair, the weight of guilt settling over her. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never thought he'd go this far." Sarah Morgan's eyes flashed with unexpected fire. "Don't you dare apologize for doing what's right, Eleanor Morgan. Your father would be proud of you, and I am too." She gripped her daughter's hand tightly. "We won't let Harrison win through these underhanded tactics." Yet despite her mother's brave words, Ellie could see the fear behind them. The increased taxes were a significant blow to their already strained finances. Combined with the trouble at Maggie's diner, Harrison's message was clear. He could make life in Willow Creek very difficult for the Morgans and anyone who helped them. That evening, Ellie sat with Thunderbolt in the quiet shed, leaning against his warm side as she had begun to do during their quiet moments together. The horse seemed to sense her distress, turning his head to nuzzle her hair gently. "He's hurting innocent people now," she whispered, stroking Thunderbolt's neck. "Maggie, Mom, who knows who else he'll target next? Maybe I've been selfish, putting you above everything else." Thunderbolt snorted softly, as if disagreeing with her assessment. "Easy for you to say," Ellie murmured with a sad smile. "You're worth it, I know that. But is it fair to let others suffer?" As if in response to her question, the shed door opened, revealing Mr. Wilson. His face was grim in the lantern light. "We've got trouble," he said without preamble. "Harrison's filed an official complaint with the Racing Commission, claiming theft of a valuable racehorse. They've sent a representative to investigate. They'll be here tomorrow morning." Ellie's heart sank. Can they take him? If they believe Harrison's story, yes. The commission has authority over registered thoroughbreds. Mr. Wilson's weathered face softened slightly. But they also have strict rules about the care of racehorses. If we can prove Harrison abandoned an injured animal. "But we don't have the note," Ellie said, desperation creeping into her voice. "No," Mr. Wilson agreed, "but we have something else." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device. "I've got a friend who's a bit of a computer whiz." He managed to recover the deleted text messages from one of Harrison's former stable hands, messages ordering the disposal of an injured horse that was costing too much to maintain. For the first time in days, hope flickered in Ellie's chest. "Will that be enough?" "Maybe," Mr. Wilson said cautiously. "It's not a smoking gun, but it's something. Now we just need to convince the commission representative to look at the evidence fairly, despite Harrison's influence." As Mr. Wilson left to make preparations for tomorrow's inspection, Ellie remained with Thunderbolt, drawing strength from his quiet presence. Tomorrow would bring yet another battle in their ongoing war with Harrison, perhaps the most important one yet. Morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that matched the anxiety gripping Ellie as she prepared for the Racing Commission's inspection. She'd spent extra time with Thunderbolt, carefully grooming his coat until it gleamed despite the altered markings. The horse seemed to sense the importance of the day, standing patiently as she worked, occasionally nuzzling her shoulder in quiet solidarity. "You look handsome," she told him, stroking his strong neck. "But more importantly, you look healthy and cared for. That's what matters today." By 9 o'clock, several vehicles had arrived at the modest Morgan farm. First came Mr. Wilson, bringing with him a young man carrying computer equipment who was introduced only as Kevin, the tech expert who had recovered the deleted messages. Next was Dr. Mercer, who had voluntarily come to provide professional testimony about Thunderbolt's condition when found versus his current state. The Racing Commission representative arrived precisely at 9:30, a tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. She introduced herself as Margaret Winters, her crisp voice and direct gaze suggesting someone who brooked no nonsense. "I'm here to investigate claims regarding a thoroughbred registered as Royal Tempest," she stated, consulting her clipboard. "Specifically allegations of theft from Westland stables and counter-allegations of abandonment and neglect." Before Ellie could respond, a sleek black car pulled into the yard, sending chickens scattering. James Harrison emerged, followed by Phillips and a man in an expensive suit whom Ellie didn't recognize. Harrison's face was composed into a mask of concerned professionalism, but Ellie could see the cold calculation in his eyes. "Ms. Winters," he greeted the commission representative. "Thank you for coming. This is Richard Benton, my attorney." "Mr. Harrison," Ms. Winters acknowledged with a nod. "I'd like to proceed with examining the horse first, if you don't mind. Then we'll hear statements from both parties." Harrison gestured magnanimously. "Of course, though I should warn you, the animal may not be in the best condition. These people lack the resources and expertise to properly care for a thoroughbred of Royal Tempest caliber." Ellie bit her tongue, reminding herself that losing her temper wouldn't help Thunderbolt. Ms. Winters merely raised an eyebrow at Harrison's comment and turned to Ellie. "Please show me to the horse, Miss Morgan." Ellie led the small procession to the shed, which they had converted into a comfortable stable for Thunderbolt. She'd added fresh straw that morning and made sure his water was clean and his limited space as pleasant as possible. When they entered, Thunderbolt raised his head, ears pricked forward with interest at the newcomers. Ms. Winters approached him slowly, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of his appearance and condition. "This is the horse you claim is Royal Tempest?" she asked Harrison, her tone neutral. Harrison hesitated just a fraction too long, his eyes narrowing as he studied the altered markings on Thunderbolt's face and legs. "Yes," he said finally, "though he appears to have been modified in some way." "I haven't modified anything," Ellie said firmly. "I've been treating his injury and nursing him back to health after finding him abandoned and half-starved in the quarry." Ms. Winters turned to Dr. Mercer. "You're the local veterinarian? Can you describe the horse's condition when you first examined him?" Dr. Mercer stepped forward, professional and direct. The animal was severely malnourished, dehydrated, and suffering from an infected laceration along the left foreleg, coupled with tendon damage. In my professional opinion, he had been without proper care for at least 3 to 4 days when Miss Morgan found him. "That's impossible," Harrison interjected smoothly. "Royal Tempest was reported missing only 2 days before the Morgan girl claimed to have found him." "Reported missing, yes," Mr. Wilson said, speaking up for the first time. "But when was he actually missing, Mr. Harrison?" Ms. Winters held up a hand to pause the brewing argument. "Let me examine the injury." She bent to inspect Thunderbolt's leg, now wrapped in a clean bandage. "May I?" Ellie nodded, and Ms. Winters carefully unwrapped the bandage to reveal the healing wound beneath. She studied it with clinical detachment, occasionally making notes on her clipboard. "This is consistent with a serious racing injury," she observed, "the type that typically ends careers." She looked up at Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, according to our records, Royal Tempest was withdrawn from his last scheduled race due to a training injury. Can you explain the nature of that injury?" Harrison's attorney stepped forward. "My client isn't a veterinarian, Ms. Winters. The stable's trainer would have those details." "Convenient that he's not here," Mr. Wilson muttered. Ms. Winters continued her examination, checking Thunderbolt's overall condition, his eyes, teeth, and hooves. Finally, she stepped back. Despite the obvious injury, this horse appears to be receiving appropriate care now. He's at a healthy weight considering his recent trauma. The wound is healing well, and he shows no signs of ongoing distress. Ellie felt a surge of pride at the commissioner's assessment, but knew this was just the beginning of their case. "Now, Ms. Winters said, turning to face them all, "I'd like to hear exactly how this horse came to be in Miss Morgan's possession, and Mr. Harrison's account of how Royal Tempest went missing." For the next hour, they sat at the Morgans' kitchen table, each presenting their version of events. Harrison's story was smooth and practiced. Royal Tempest had suffered a minor training injury that required specialized treatment. During transport to the equine hospital, the trailer had been damaged on the poor rural roads, allowing the horse to escape. Despite extensive searching, they hadn't located him until learning the Morgans had somehow acquired him. When it was Ellie's turn, she recounted finding Thunderbolt trapped and injured in the quarry, the crumpled note that had subsequently disappeared, and the visits from Harrison first offering to buy the horse, then threatening legal action when she refused. "It makes no sense," she concluded. "If Thunderbolt was just temporarily injured and valuable enough to offer thousands of dollars for, why abandon him in the first place? Why not get him the treatment he needed?" Harrison's attorney smiled condescendingly. "A creative story, Miss Morgan. But without this alleged note, you have no evidence that my client abandoned the horse. Perhaps you found him wandering after he escaped, as we've stated." "Actually," Mr. Wilson interrupted, "we do have evidence." He nodded to Kevin, who opened his laptop and connected a small device. "These are text messages recovered from the phone of Brian Dawson, a former employee of Westland Stables who was fired last month." Kevin pulled up several messages on the screen. The most damning read, "Boss says to get rid of RT, not worth fixing. Take him to the old quarry and be discreet, no paperwork." A tense silence followed as Ms. Winters read the messages. Harrison's face had gone rigid, though he maintained his composure. "These messages are obviously fabricated," his attorney declared. "We have no way to verify their authenticity. The Racing Commission has digital forensics experts who can verify them," Ms. Winters replied calmly. She turned to Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, Royal Tempest was insured for a substantial amount. Did you file a claim after his disappearance?" The question clearly caught Harrison off guard. No, not yet. We were hoping to recover him first." Ms. Winters made another note on her clipboard. "I see. And if the horse had died from his injuries or been euthanized, you would have been able to collect on that policy, correct?" "This line of questioning is inappropriate," Harrison's attorney objected. "My client has done nothing wrong. He's the victim of theft, not the perpetrator of abandonment." Ellie watched the exchange with growing hope. Ms. Winters wasn't simply accepting Harrison's version of events. The text messages, combined with Harrison's inconsistent story about the injury's severity, were creating cracks in his carefully constructed narrative. As the questioning continued, Thunderbolt's soft nickering could be heard from the shed, as if he too was waiting for his fate to be decided. The kitchen had grown uncomfortably warm with so many people gathered around the small table. Ms. Winters reviewed her notes in silence while Harrison and his attorney exchanged whispered consultations. Ellie sat motionless, acutely aware of how much depended on this woman's assessment. Finally, Ms. Winters closed her notebook and addressed the room. "Based on my examination and the information presented, I cannot make an immediate determination of ownership. The Commission will need to investigate further, particularly regarding these text messages and the discrepancies in the timeline of events." Harrison's attorney began to protest, but Ms. Winters continued firmly. "Until our investigation is complete, the horse will remain in Miss Morgan's care, as he appears to be recovering well under her supervision. Mr. Harrison, the Commission will be reviewing your insurance policy on Royal Tempest and the circumstances surrounding his reported disappearance. Harrison's carefully composed expression slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of cold fury that sent a chill down Ellie's spine. "This is absurd," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That horse is worth tens of thousands of dollars. You're leaving him with a family that can barely afford to feed themselves, let alone provide proper care for a thoroughbred." "Financial resources aren't the only measure of proper care, Mr. Harrison," Ms. Winters replied evenly. "The horse's current condition suggests otherwise." As Harrison and his entourage prepared to leave, he paused beside Ellie. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. "You have no idea what you've started." After the commission representative departed with promises to be in touch soon, Dr. Mercer approached Ellie with a rare smile. "You did well," he said. "Ms. Winters is known for her integrity. If anyone will give this a fair investigation, it's her." "But she didn't actually rule in our favor," Ellie pointed out, worry still knotting her stomach. "No, but she didn't rule in Harrison's favor either," Mr. Wilson said. "And given his influence, that's significant. Most importantly, Thunderbolt stays with you for now." The following days brought unexpected developments. Word of the confrontation at the Morgan farm spread quickly through Willow Creek. Harrison's attempts to pressure Maggie's diner and the sudden increase in the Morgan's property taxes didn't remain secret for long. To Ellie's surprise, instead of turning people against them, Harrison's tactics seemed to be having the opposite effect. Customers flocked to Maggie's diner in unprecedented numbers, many openly stating they were there to support her against Harrison's bullying. An anonymous donation arrived at the county tax office covering the difference in the Morgans' reassessed property taxes. Even Sheriff Davis stopped by the farm, ostensibly to check on things, but his pointed comments about standing against intimidation made his sympathies clear. "People are tired of the Harrisons acting like they own this town," Maggie explained, when Ellie expressed amazement at the support. "Your stand with Thunderbolt has given folks a rallying point. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say no to start something bigger." Meanwhile, Thunderbolt continued to improve. The wound had closed completely, leaving an angry red scar that would eventually fade to white. He was walking more confidently each day, though still with a noticeable limp. Dr. Mercer's prognosis remained cautiously optimistic. "The tendon damage will always be there," he explained during a follow-up visit. "But with proper rehabilitation, he can live a comfortable, active life, just not as a racehorse." Ellie had begun gentle exercises with Thunderbolt, walking him in gradually widening circles, encouraging him to strengthen his injured leg without overexerting it. The bond between them deepened with each session. He would nicker softly when she approached, nuzzling her pockets for the apple slices she always brought. Sometimes, when they were alone, she would talk to him about her hopes and fears, and he would listen with pricked ears as if understanding every word. One evening, as Ellie was finishing Thunderbolt's exercises, a pickup truck she didn't recognize pulled into the yard. A middle-aged woman stepped out, her weathered face suggesting years spent outdoors. She introduced herself as Karen Mitchell, owner of a small equine therapy center on the other side of the county. "Maggie told me about you and Thunderbolt," she explained, "about how you rescued him and stood up to Harrison. I thought maybe I could help with his rehabilitation." Karen had worked with injured horses for years, helping them recover and find new purpose. She spent over an hour examining Thunderbolt and demonstrating exercises that would help him regain strength and flexibility. "He has the right temperament for therapy work," she observed as Thunderbolt gently accepted her handling. "Once he's stronger, you might consider bringing him to the center. Horses like him can make a real difference for children with special needs or veterans dealing with trauma." The idea of Thunderbolt having a meaningful future beyond racing, helping others heal as he himself had been healed, filled Ellie with a warm hope. "I'd like that," she said softly, stroking his sleek neck. Karen smiled, Harrison sees these animals as investments. What he never understood is that their value goes far beyond money. Before leaving, she added, "Be careful, Ellie. Harrison doesn't lose gracefully. The quieter he gets, the more I'd worry." Her warning proved prescient. 3 days later, Ellie woke to find someone had tried to break into the shed where Thunderbolt was kept. The padlock had been damaged but not breached. Nearby, spray painted on the side of the shed, were the words, "Last warning." Sheriff Davis investigated but found little evidence beyond some partial boot prints. "Could have been teenagers," he suggested, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe that. "Might be worth setting up some surveillance." Mr. Wilson arrived that afternoon with a pair of motion-activated cameras. "These connect to your Wi-Fi," he explained as he installed them. "Any movement near the shed will be recorded and sent directly to your phone and to cloud storage." As they worked, Ellie voiced the fear that had been growing since finding the vandalism. What if Harrison tries to take Thunderbolt by force? Or worse, what if he decides that if he can't have him, no one will? Mr. Wilson's weathered face grew solemn. "I've been thinking the same thing. That's why I've spoken with some of the other farmers. We're setting up a rotation. Someone will be watching your place round the clock until the commission makes their ruling." Tears pricked Ellie's eyes at this unexpected support. "Why would you all do that for us?" "Not just for you," Mr. Wilson replied, adjusting the angle of one camera. "For what you represent. Standing up to the Harrisons isn't something many have had the courage to do. Besides," he added with a rare smile, "that horse deserves his second chance." That night, Ellie slept in the shed with Thunderbolt, a flashlight and her father's old baseball bat beside her. Outside, she knew, Ed Parker from the neighboring farm was keeping watch from his truck. Tomorrow it would be someone else, and the day after that another volunteer. An invisible network of protection had formed around them, born from a community's quiet resistance to a power that had gone unchecked for too long. As she drifted toward sleep, Thunderbolt's rhythmic breathing a comforting sound in the darkness, Ellie reflected on how much had changed in the weeks since she'd found him. What had begun as a simple act of compassion for an abandoned animal had evolved into something far larger, a challenge to the established order, a reclaiming of values that money couldn't buy. And somewhere in that journey, both she and Thunderbolt had begun to heal in ways that went beyond physical recovery. A week passed without incident, the constant surveillance seemingly deterring further attempts to reach Thunderbolt. Each day, Ellie grew more hopeful that the Racing Commission's investigation would conclude in their favor. Ms. Winters had called once to request additional information and to inform them that they were making progress in verifying the text messages. Thunderbolt continued to improve, his step growing more confident as the damaged tendon strengthened. He'd begun to show flashes of the spirited racehorse he once was, occasionally breaking into a brief, uneven canter when Ellie led him around the paddock. Each small victory in his recovery felt like a personal triumph, a vindication of her decision to fight for him. On a crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted from the trees bordering their property, Ellie received an unexpected call from Ms. Winters. "We've completed our investigation," the commission representative said, her voice as brisk and professional as ever. "I'll be coming to the farm this afternoon to discuss our findings. Mr. Harrison will be present as well." A knot formed in Ellie's stomach. "Does that mean you've made a decision about Thunderbolt?" "Yes," Ms. Winters replied, though she offered no hint of what that decision might be. "I'll explain everything when I arrive. 2 o'clock sharp." The hours until the meeting crawled by with excruciating slowness. Ellie spent them with Thunderbolt, grooming his coat until it gleamed and talking to him in low, soothing tones that calmed her own nerves as much as his. Mr. Wilson arrived early, his presence a silent support as they waited. At precisely 2 o'clock, Ms. Winters's car pulled into the yard, followed moments later by Harrison's sleek black vehicle. This time, he came with only his attorney, his expression unreadable as they approached the porch where Ellie, her mother, and Mr. Wilson waited. "Thank you all for meeting," Ms. Winters began after brief greetings. "As I mentioned, the Commission has completed its investigation regarding the thoroughbred registered as Royal Tempest." She opened a folder containing official-looking documents. "Based on our findings, including verified communications between Westland Stables employees, veterinary records, and insurance documentation, we have determined that the horse was indeed abandoned following an injury, contrary to Mr. Harrison's claims." A surge of relief washed through Ellie, so powerful she felt momentarily lightheaded. Harrison's face darkened, but he remained silent as Ms. Winters continued. "Additionally, we found evidence that Mr. Harrison attempted to file an insurance claim for the horse's full value, while concealing the fact that he had ordered the animal abandoned rather than providing required medical treatment." Ms. Winters's voice hardened. "The Commission takes a very serious view of such actions." Harrison's attorney stepped forward. "My client disputes these findings and reserves the right to challenge them through appropriate legal channels." "Of course," Ms. Winters replied coolly. "However, the Commission's decision stands. Ownership of the horse formerly registered as Royal Tempest is officially transferred to Eleanor Morgan, who has demonstrated appropriate care and commitment to the animal's welfare." She handed Ellie a document, a certificate of ownership with Thunderbolt's new registered name and Ellie listed as his owner. "Congratulations, Miss Morgan. He's legally yours now." Ellie's hands trembled as she accepted the certificate, joy and disbelief mingling with the lingering fear that somehow this victory could still be snatched away. She looked up at Harrison, whose composed facade had cracked to reveal cold fury beneath. "This isn't over," he said, the same words he'd spoken after their previous confrontation, but now laced with unmistakable menace. "You've cost me a great deal of money, girl. People who cross me tend to regret it." "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Harrison," Ms. Winters observed. "I should remind you that intimidation can be added to the list of ethical violations the Commission is already considering against you." Harrison's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, simply turning on his heel and stalking back to his car, his attorney hurrying behind him. As the black car disappeared down the driveway, the tension that had held Ellie rigid began to dissolve. "Is it really over?" she asked Ms. Winters. "He can't take Thunderbolt back?" "The ownership transfer is official and binding," Ms. Winters confirmed. "However," she hesitated, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Be careful, Miss Morgan. Men like Harrison don't accept defeat gracefully, and he stands to lose more than just the horse. The insurance fraud investigation could have serious consequences for him and Westland Stables." After Ms. Winters departed, Ellie rushed to the paddock where Thunderbolt waited, seemingly aware that something significant had occurred. She buried her face in his neck, breathing in his familiar scent. "You're really mine now," she whispered. "Officially and forever." The news spread quickly through Willow Creek. That evening, neighbors began arriving at the Morgan farm, bringing food and congratulations in an impromptu celebration. Maggie came with an enormous cake decorated with a surprisingly detailed frosting horse. Dr. Mercer appeared with bottles of cider and gruff good wishes. Even Sheriff Davis stopped by, tipping his hat to Ellie with a smile that acknowledged her victory without words. As twilight settled over the farm, Ellie stood with Mr. Wilson, watching Thunderbolt graze peacefully in the paddock, unaware of his status as the town's symbol of resistance against wealth and power. "What happens now?" Ellie asked. "With Harrison, I mean." Mr. Wilson's expression was thoughtful. "He's in trouble with the Racing Commission and possibly facing insurance fraud charges. That kind of scandal could damage Westland Stables significantly." He glanced at Ellie. "But don't underestimate him. Men like that don't go down easily. Later that night, after the impromptu celebration had ended and the house was quiet, Ellie made one final check on Thunderbolt before bed. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Thunderbolt nickered softly as she approached, his outline silvered by moonlight. "We did it, boy," she murmured, stroking his velvet nose. "We stood our ground, and we won." She was about to turn back toward the house when a flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness beyond the paddock fence. Before she could react, a figure lunged toward her, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "Think you've won, do you?" It was Harrison, his voice a harsh whisper, his face twisted with rage in the dim light. "You've ruined me, you stupid girl. But if I can't have that horse, neither can you." He shoved her roughly against the paddock fence, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. As she struggled to breathe, she saw the glint of metal in his hand, a syringe caught in the moonlight. "A simple solution," Harrison said, his voice eerily calm now as he moved toward Thunderbolt. "Untraceable, painless, just a heart attack, nothing suspicious. Happens to racehorses all the time." Terror flooded Ellie as she realized his intention. "No," she gasped, lunging forward despite the pain in her ribs. But Harrison was already reaching for Thunderbolt, syringe poised. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Thunderbolt, sensing the threat, reared suddenly, his forelegs pawing the air with unexpected strength and coordination. Despite his injured leg, he moved with the grace and power of the champion he once was. His hoof caught Harrison's outstretched arm, sending the syringe flying into the darkness as the man stumbled backward with a cry of pain and surprise. In the distance, a truck engine roared to life, the neighbor who had been keeping watch, alerted by the commotion. Harrison hesitated, clutching his injured arm, then turned and fled into the darkness beyond the farm's boundaries. Ellie rushed to Thunderbolt, who had settled back on all fours, trembling slightly but unharmed. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart pounding. "You saved us both," she whispered against his warm hide. "You beautiful, brave boy." Sheriff Davis arrived within minutes of being called, his cruiser's lights cutting through the darkness as Ellie sat in the paddock with Thunderbolt, still trembling from the confrontation. The neighbor who had been keeping watch, Mr. Jenkins, had seen Harrison fleeing across the fields toward the main road and provided a clear description to the sheriff. "We'll find him," Sheriff Davis assured Ellie as he carefully collected the syringe Harrison had dropped. "Breaking and entering, assault, attempted animal cruelty. He's not walking away from this." Ellie nodded, but found it hard to feel triumph in this final escalation. Harrison's face, twisted with hatred and desperation, kept flashing through her mind. The man had been willing to kill a horse out of pure vengeance, to destroy something valuable simply because he couldn't possess it. "I need to have Dr. Mercer check Thunderbolt," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "just to make sure he didn't hurt his leg again when he reared up." Sheriff Davis nodded, his usually stern face softening with concern. "And you need to get checked out too, Ellie. Those bruises on your arm look nasty, and you might have injured your ribs when he pushed you." In the days that followed, the full impact of Harrison's actions rippled through Willow Creek. He was arrested the following morning at Westland Stables, attempting to pack for what appeared to be a hasty departure. The contents of the syringe were analyzed and found to contain a lethal combination of drugs used to euthanize animals, confirming his intent had been to kill Thunderbolt. The Racing Commission, already investigating Harrison for ethical violations, expanded their inquiry to include this latest incident. Westland Stables was placed under temporary supervision, with rumors circulating that Harrison would be permanently banned from thoroughbred racing and breeding. For Ellie and Thunderbolt, life began to find a new rhythm. The horse's health continued to improve, though Dr. Mercer confirmed he would always have a slight limp from the tendon damage. But he's sound enough for light riding and certainly for therapy work, he told Ellie. He's a survivor. 2 months after the confrontation with Harrison, Ellie led Thunderbolt up the ramp into Karen Mitchell's trailer. It was his first day at the Equine Therapy Center, and though Ellie felt a twinge of anxiety at being separated from him, she knew this was an important step for both of them. "He'll do wonderfully," Karen assured her. "His temperament is perfect for working with the children, and his own story of recovery will inspire them." Ellie nodded, giving Thunderbolt one last pat before stepping back to let Karen secure the trailer. "I'll be there this afternoon to see how he's settling in," she reminded Karen, who smiled at the young woman's protectiveness. "He'll be fine, and so will you." The changes in Ellie's life extended beyond Thunderbolt. The publicity surrounding Harrison's downfall and her stand against him had reached far beyond Willow Creek. A regional newspaper had published a feature on her story, which caught the attention of a state agricultural college. They had reached out with a surprising offer, a full scholarship to their equine studies program, citing her extraordinary commitment to animal welfare and rehabilitation. The opportunity to attend college, a dream Ellie had reluctantly set aside after her father's death, now seemed suddenly, amazingly possible. The scholarship would cover tuition and housing, allowing her to study while still coming home regularly to see her family and Thunderbolt. "You have to accept," her mother had insisted when Ellie hesitated, worried about leaving her family to manage without her help. "This is exactly what your father would have wanted for you." Sarah Morgan had changed too in the months since Thunderbolt came into their lives. The constant worry that had lined her face had eased somewhat. The community's support during their stand against Harrison had reminded her that they weren't alone, that the bonds of friendship and shared values were stronger than she'd realized. The effects of Harrison's fall from grace rippled through Willow Creek in unexpected ways. The bank he controlled was restructured under new management, with more favorable terms for local businesses like Maggie's Diner. The property taxes on several small farms, including the Morgans, were reassessed and returned to their previous rates. There were even whispers that Westland Stables might be sold, possibly to a cooperative of local horse breeders who had long been overshadowed by Harrison's operation. On a golden afternoon in late spring, nearly a year after Ellie had found Thunderbolt in the quarry, she stood at the fence of the therapy center's main paddock watching as he carried a small girl with cerebral palsy. The child's face was alight with joy, her usual physical struggles temporarily forgotten as she experienced the freedom of movement that riding provided. Thunderbolt moved with careful steadiness, seeming to understand the precious nature of his cargo. Karen joined Ellie at the fence, following her gaze. "He's a natural," she said. "The children adore him, and he seems to know exactly how to behave with each one. Some horses have that gift, an innate gentleness combined with strength." Ellie nodded, throat tight with emotion. "He's found his purpose." "So have you," Karen observed. "Your professors tell me you're at the top of your class. That scholarship was well-deserved." The months at college had been challenging but deeply fulfilling for Ellie. She was learning not just about equine care and rehabilitation, but about the science behind what she'd done instinctively with Thunderbolt. Each new piece of knowledge felt like a step toward the future she now saw clearly, running her own rehabilitation center for injured and abandoned horses. "I couldn't have done any of this without him," Ellie said softly. "That's the funny thing about rescue," Karen replied, her eyes still on Thunderbolt and the beaming child on his back. "We think we're the ones doing the saving, but often they save us right back." Later, after the therapy sessions had ended and the children had gone home, Ellie took Thunderbolt for a quiet walk along the center's wooded trail. His gait still showed the telltale unevenness from his old injury, but he moved with confidence, head high and ears forward, as they navigated the familiar path. At a small clearing overlooking the valley, Ellie stopped. The afternoon sun bathed the landscape in warm light, catching the copper highlights in Thunderbolt's bay coat. She stroked his neck, remembering the frightened, injured animal she'd found in the quarry, so different from the strong, confident horse beside her now. "Look how far we've come," she murmured. Thunderbolt turned his head, gently nuzzling her shoulder in what felt remarkably like agreement. In his dark eyes, Ellie saw the same quiet strength that had first called to her, the determination to survive, to overcome, to thrive despite the odds. A year ago, she had made a promise to a broken horse abandoned by those who should have protected him. She had vowed that he would run again, not for the glory of owners who had discarded him, but for himself, for joy, for freedom. And though his running would never again be the explosive speed of the racetrack, as Ellie watched Thunderbolt move with purpose and dignity in his new life, she knew that promise had been kept in ways more meaningful than she could have imagined. The abandoned champion had indeed been transformed, not back into the racehorse he once was, but into something perhaps more valuable, a healer, a teacher, a friend. And in that transformation, Ellie too had found her own path, her own strength, her own future. Together they had turned what could have been an ending into a new beginning, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from crossing finish lines, but from having the courage to start an entirely different race.